Run before they lock you in that carriage." The whisper came from the trembling maid as Rosalind Whitfield stood before the mirror in her wedding gown, silk, lace, and misery. Outside the door, music swelled and guests murmured in the chapel pews. It was the morning San Francisco society had been waiting for, the union of the wealthy Whitfield family and the powerful Ashtons. But the bride's reflection looked nothing like joy. Rosa's corset dug deep into her ribs. Her cheeks were flushed, not from excitement, but from shame. Behind her, her mother fussed with the veil, muttering, "Stand tall, Rosalind. Maybe if you stop slouching, you'll look half decent in the photographs." Her father, standing by the doorway, added coldly, "Remember, girl, this marriage keeps our name in business. Don't ruin it." The man waiting at the altar, Percival Ashton III, had already ruined her. He'd told her so 2 nights before, at the rehearsal dinner. "You're lucky I agreed to this arrangement. I'll never touch you. Once this farce is over, I'll have the freedom I deserve." Now, with bells beginning to toll outside, something inside Rosa cracked. She looked down at her shaking hands, soft, calloused from sewing, not fit for the world of diamonds and dinner parties. The corset squeezed her chest until she could barely breathe. And then she made her choice. Without a sound, she tore off the veil, ripped the pins from her hair, and slipped out the servants' corridor. She traded the white gown for a plain cotton dress, left her jewelry on the floor, and walked into the morning fog. By the time the first hymn began, the bride was gone. And somewhere beyond the city limits, a train whistle screamed, carrying a runaway bride toward a wilderness that would change everything. This is a work of fiction inspired by real-life events. Names, characters, and settings have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. This narrative is intended to explore themes of self-worth and resilience. It does not aim to target or offend any individuals or groups. Where are you listening from tonight? Denver, Manila, or Berlin? Tell me below before we climb this mountain together. Rosalind Rosa Whitfield had never seen the world beyond the city's gas lamps and marble floors. The train that carried her north rattled like a heartbeat, fast, frightened, unstoppable. She sat by the window clutching a small carpet bag, the only possession she could truly call her own. Inside it, a few coins, a folded photograph of her late grandmother, and a half-written letter she'd never sent. "One day I'll find a place where I can breathe." Now she was chasing that promise. Outside, the scenery changed from polished cityscapes to wild hills, then to forests so dense they seemed to swallow the sky. As miles rolled by, Rosa pressed her palm against the window and whispered, "Please, just let me start over." At the next stop, a small wooden platform surrounded by endless green, she stepped off, her heart pounding. The air smelled of pine and rain, so clean it almost stung. There was no plan, no destination, only the sense that anywhere was better than the life she'd fled. By afternoon, dark clouds gathered. She followed a dirt trail that wound between towering firs, her boots sinking into mud. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the cry of a raven, made her flinch. But she kept walking. She couldn't go back now. By dusk, exhaustion claimed her. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled, her shoes soaked. When thunder cracked above, she stumbled toward a faint shimmer of light through the trees, smoke rising from a chimney. It took every ounce of strength to reach it, a small cabin nestled beside a stream, built from weathered logs, solid and still. She raised a shaking hand to knock, but before she could, the door opened. A man filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, his hair dark and unkempt, his beard thick but trimmed with precision. His flannel shirt was rolled to the elbows, and the smell of pine resin clung to him. His eyes, gray as river stone, narrowed as he studied her. "You lost?" His voice was deep, rough, but not unkind. Rosa tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her lips were blue from cold.
I just needed shelter. I'm sorry, I'll go.
The man frowned, stepping aside. You won't make it 50 yards in this weather. Get in. Before she could protest, thunder rolled again. She hesitated, then obeyed. The warmth hit her like a wave, firelight flickering, the smell of stew simmering over the hearth. He handed her a blanket and gestured toward the chair by the fire. Sit. You look half dead.
Thank you,
she whispered, sinking down. He nodded once and turned back to stir the pot. Name's Elijah Stone, he said after a pause. You can call me Eli. She hesitated. Rosa. Rosa, he repeated, testing the sound like it was something delicate. All right, Rosa. Eat first. Explanations can wait. And as the storm raged outside, the runaway bride, stripped of diamonds, dignity, and all she'd known, sat beside the mountain man who would soon teach her what it meant to be free. Rosa awoke to birdsong and the scent of cedar smoke. Morning light poured through the cabin's single window, painting the rough-hewn walls gold. For a few blessed seconds she forgot who she was, a runaway bride, a girl with nowhere to go, and simply breathed. Then she heard the scrape of a chair behind her. Elijah Stone sat at the table, sharpening a knife with slow, methodical strokes. "You're awake?" he said without looking up. "Soup's on the stove. Eat before it gets cold." Her stomach growled in answer. She moved stiffly toward the hearth and found a bowl waiting for her. The soup was simple: potatoes, carrots, a hint of wild thyme, but it tasted like mercy. When she finished, Eli rose and pulled on a heavy coat. "Creek's over that ridge. I'm checking the traps. You'll stay here."
I can help,
she blurted, surprising even herself. His brow lifted. "You don't look built for mountain work." Rosa straightened.
Maybe not, but I can learn.
A long moment passed, then he tossed her an extra coat. "Fine. Don't fall behind." They stepped into the forest. Dew clung to every leaf. The world smelled of wet earth and pine. Eli's strides were long and sure, while Rosa tripped often, her boots sinking into moss. Yet she refused to complain. Each stumble felt like a small rebellion against the life she'd escaped, the world that told her softness was weakness. At the creek, Eli knelt to check a line of traps. "City folk don't last up here," he said without malice. "Too loud, too quick. The mountain doesn't like hurry." Rosa crouched beside him, watching the current sparkle in the morning light. "Then maybe I'll learn to be quiet." For the first time he smiled, a small, reluctant curve of the mouth that made him look years younger. "Maybe you will." The day stretched long. They carried wood, fetched water, patched a leaky section of the roof. Rosa's arms burned, her palms blistered, but a strange satisfaction rooted inside her. When she looked up, she caught Eli watching her, not with pity, but with something close to respect. By sunset, thunderheads rolled again across the peaks. They hurried inside just as rain began to fall. Eli stoked the fire while Rosa hung their soaked coats near the hearth. The cabin filled with the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof. "You did well today," he said finally. She blinked.
I nearly fell into the creek.
"You didn't quit." Rosa laughed softly.
If I quit every time something hurt, I'd still be back there, in silk and lies.
Eli studied her face, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Someone hurt you bad, didn't they?" She hesitated.
Someone decided my worth was a number on a bank contract, and my parents agreed. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he handed her a mug of coffee. Up here, money's just paper. You can't eat it, can't burn it long enough to stay warm. She smiled faintly. Then what matters?
Work, quiet, knowing who you are when no one's looking. Silence settled again, thick but peaceful. Outside, the rain softened into mist. Inside, two strangers who had lost faith in the world began, unknowingly, to find it in each other. Before sleep, Rosa spread her borrowed blanket near the hearth.
Thank you for everything.
Eli paused by the door. Don't thank me yet, he said gruffly. Tomorrow you're splitting kindling. She grinned, surprising them both.
I'll try not to chop off my hand.
He snorted. That'd make two of us useless. When the door closed behind him, Rosa lay awake listening to the wind sigh through the pines. For the first time since she'd fled the city, she didn't feel lost. She felt found. Days slipped quietly into one another, marked by the rhythm of chores and the steady pulse of the wilderness. Rosa learned how to live by the mountain's clock. How to read dawn not by the sky's color, but by the smell of cold air and pine sap. How to judge supper time by the angle of sunlight slicing through the window. She rose before sunrise, often finding Eli already outside, tending the fire pit or mending traps. He was a man of few words, but in the language of work and silence, Rosa began to understand him. He moved with purpose, his every motion careful and precise, as though he'd built this life piece by piece to keep something broken inside from collapsing. In those first mornings, she struggled. The axe felt too heavy, the buckets too wide for her grip. Her hands blistered and bled, yet she refused to stop. When she finally split her first clean piece of wood, Eli glanced over, a rare flicker of pride softening his features. Straight cut, he said simply. She beamed like a child. Then I'm not hopeless. Didn't say that, he replied, but there was a hint of laughter in his voice that made her heart catch. They ate their meals at a small wooden table by the window, fresh bread, salted fish, wild greens she had learned to forage. Rosa found joy in the simple acts of living, washing clothes by the stream, planting beans behind the cabin, hanging laundry that smelled of sunlight. Each task stitched her a little tighter into the quiet fabric of this place. Sometimes she caught herself humming. On the fourth week, she began baking again, something she hadn't done since her mother called it a servant's pastime. She kneaded dough while Eli worked outside, the smell of yeast and flour filling the air. When he came in, sweat on his brow, she handed him a still warm loaf. He tore off a piece, tasted it, and stilled. Reminds me of something I haven't had in years, he murmured.
What's that?
Home. Rosa blinked, realizing he wasn't talking about bread at all. That evening, he built her a proper shelf for her belongings. A folded dress, a hairbrush, the small photograph she'd carried from the city. You can stay as long as you need, he said quietly as he hammered the final nail. Her throat tightened.
Thank you, Eli. I mean that.
He didn't look at her. You don't owe me thanks. You've earned your keep. But later that night, when the wind howled outside, Rosa woke to find another blanket folded neatly by her feet. She smiled into the dark, knowing exactly who had placed it there. Days turned warmer. The snow on the peaks melted into streams that laughed over stone. They began spending evenings outside on the porch, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. Rosa loved those silences, the ones filled not with words but with understanding. Once she asked him, "Don't you ever get lonely up here?"
He hesitated, his eyes tracing the tree line. "Used to," he said. "Then I stopped letting it mean something bad." She nodded slowly.
"And now?" Now his gaze shifted to her, steady and unflinching.
"Now it's not so lonely." The world seemed to still around them. Rosa looked down quickly, pretending to fix the hem of her sleeve, but her pulse betrayed her. She hadn't felt seen like that, truly seen, in her entire life. Later that week, she convinced him to let her accompany him to a nearby ridge to collect herbs. The climb was steep, and twice she nearly slipped, but his hand caught hers each time, rough, calloused, firm. At the top, the valley stretched before them like a painting of greens and golds. "I never knew the world could look like this," she whispered. "That's because you were looking from the wrong place," he said. They sat side by side until the light faded, the silence between them comfortable and charged with something unspoken. When they returned to the cabin, Rosa found herself lingering by the fire, unwilling to say goodnight.
Eli poured her a cup of tea and sat opposite her, his eyes reflecting the flames.
"I used to think love was a trap," she said softly. "Something meant to cage me." He tilted his head. "And now?" "Now," she whispered, "it feels like freedom." He didn't reply, but the way he looked at her said enough. That night, Rosa lay awake listening to the river outside, realizing that the mountain had become her refuge, and maybe, just maybe, the man beside her fire had become her home. Summer came fast to the mountain, and with it came quiet contentment. The small garden Rosa planted was beginning to bloom, green shoots rising from the soil like tiny declarations of hope. Every day followed a gentle rhythm: work, meals, laughter, and evenings spent watching the sky fade from gold to violet. For a woman who had once lived under chandeliers and cold stares, the scent of pine and bread meant more than all the pearls in San Francisco. But peace, Rosa soon learned, is a fragile thing.
It never lasts without being tested. The first sign came one late afternoon when Eli returned from town, his brow tight and jaw set. "Someone's been asking questions," he said, hanging his coat by the door. Rosa looked up from the dough she was kneading. "Questions?" "About a woman. Said she came through on the northbound train, alone, dark hair, heavy set." His voice softened, but the words still carried weight. "Sound familiar?" Her blood went cold. "They found me." He nodded once. "A man in a gray coat, fancy, with lawyers." "Percival," she breathed, feeling the old fear crawl back up her throat. Eli leaned on the table, his expression unreadable. "Who is he?" She hesitated, then told him everything: the engagement, the insults, the contract her parents forced her into. She told him about the night she ran, how she traded lace for rags and promises for freedom. By the time she finished, her voice trembled. Eli said nothing for a long while. Then he crossed the room and crouched in front of her. "You did right to run." Tears blurred her vision. "They'll come for me. They'll say I belong to him." Eli's eyes hardened. "No one owns you, Rosa. Not while I'm breathing." She wanted to believe him. But 2 days later, belief turned into a test of truth. The sound of horses broke the stillness of dawn, hooves pounding against wet earth. Eli was already at the door when the knock came, hard enough to rattle the hinges. Outside stood 3 men. One wore a bowler hat and an expensive coat. Behind him, 2 uniformed officers, and beside them, Percival Ashton III, smirking as if he'd just found his missing property. "Well," he drawled, "the prodigal bride. Took us long enough to sniff you out." Rosa stepped back, trembling. Eli's body shifted subtly between her and the door. "You've made a mistake," he said evenly. "She's under my protection." Percival's lip curled. "Protection? She's my wife."
"I never married you," Rosa said, her voice rising. "You know I didn't." He chuckled. "Your father signed the papers. Same thing, really." "No," Eli said, his tone sharp as flint. "It's not. The law doesn't recognize forced contracts." The man in the bowler hat, one of Percival's lawyers, lifted a document. "We have signatures." "Forgery," Eli said calmly, pulling a folded paper from his own pocket. "And I have witness statements from 2 servants who saw her being threatened, filed with a lawyer in Portland last week." The sheriff looked uneasy. "That true?" Eli nodded. "Every word." "You enforce justice, don't you? Or is it only for men with gold?" The sheriff's face flushed, and he stepped back. "If she says she's not going, then she's free to stay." Percival's voice cracked like a whip. "This isn't over, Whitfield." "No," Rosa said, stepping forward at last. "It's over when I say it is." Her voice trembled, but held firm. "You can keep your money, your name, and your lies." "I'll keep my freedom." Percival's gaze flicked between her and Eli, realization dawning that he'd lost more than control. He'd lost her heart. He turned, spitting curses, and rode away. For a long time after the horses vanished down the trail, Rosa stood trembling on the porch. Eli's hand found hers, steady and sure. "You planned for this," she said softly. "You knew they might come." He nodded. "You deserved a chance to fight back, and I wasn't about to let them take that away." Rosa looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just the man who had saved her life, but the man who had believed she was worth saving. And in that moment, fear gave way to something far stronger. Love. The mountain went eerily still after Percival rode away. But Rosa knew peace wouldn't last. A man like him, humiliated, denied, would never accept defeat quietly. Eli knew it too. For days he checked the traps near the ridge, reinforced the doors, and made sure Rosa never ventured far alone. By the 4th night, the storm came. Wind howled through the pines, rain slashing the windows like claws. Eli was stacking firewood inside when he froze, head tilted toward the sound outside. The low creak of saddle leather. "They're back," he muttered. Rosa's breath caught. "Percival?" Eli grabbed his rifle and moved to the door. "Stay behind me." Through the sheets of rain, 3 riders emerged. Percival and 2 hired guns, their horses steaming in the cold. They dismounted, shouting over the storm. "Come out, Stone!" Percival's voice carried, dripping with rage. "You think you can steal from me? You think a whore in rags can defy the Ashtons?" Rosa's heart hammered. Eli's jaw clenched. He stepped onto the porch, rifle steady but lowered. A man who'd fought enough battles to know the cost of one more. "She's not yours," Eli said, "and you'd best ride back down before the mountain buries you in it." Percival laughed, rain streaming down his pale face. "You think you're her savior? You're nothing but a filthy hermit hiding from the world. I'll drag her back myself." When he took a step forward, Rosa appeared in the doorway. Her hair was wet, her cheeks streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "You will not touch me again," she said, her voice cutting through the thunder. "Not now. Not ever." Percival's smirk faltered. "You ungrateful." The next crack wasn't thunder. It was Eli's rifle firing into the air, the warning echoing off the cliffs. The hired men jumped back, hands instinctively reaching for their weapons, but Eli's aim was steady, his stance unwavering. "Try me," he said quietly. For a long, terrible moment, the only sound was rain hitting the roof. Then Percival's courage faltered. He spat at the ground, turned on his heel, and mounted his horse. "You'll regret this," he snarled, but his words were hollow. They rode off, swallowed by the storm.
Eli stood there for a moment longer before lowering his rifle. When he turned, Rosa was still in the doorway, trembling, not from fear, but from release. He stepped toward her, slow and careful, as if approaching a wild creature. "It's over," he murmured. Rosa's lips quivered.
No,
She whispered, eyes glistening.
it's just beginning.
And before he could reply, she threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest as thunder rolled above them. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that small cabin, something stronger than the storm took root. The unshakable, defiant peace of two hearts that had finally found home. Morning came quietly, washed clean by rain. The storm had passed, leaving behind a soft mist that clung to the trees and shimmered in the pale light. Rose awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Eli moving about the kitchen. For a moment she lay still, listening to the crackle of fire, to the birds returning to their songs, to the rhythm of a life she never thought she could have. When she rose, Eli was by the window, his broad frame silhouetted by the sunlight. He turned when he heard her steps. "You slept through the sunrise," he said, a faint smile tugging at his mouth.
For once, I didn't have nightmares,
she whispered. He nodded slowly, then poured her a cup. "That's a start." They sat together at the small table, sipping in silence. No grand words were needed. The danger was gone, at least for now, but something deeper had taken its place. Peace, fragile yet real. Outside, the garden glistened with dew. Rosa glanced toward it and said softly, "I think I'll plant roses this spring." Eli looked at her for a long time before replying. "Then this will finally be your home." She met his gaze, her heart swelling.
Our home.
He reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. "You're safe here, Rosa, for as long as you want to be." Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from the quiet disbelief that happiness could exist after so much fear. She nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the mountain stood silent, steady, eternal, a witness to their beginning. And as the firelight danced across their joined hands, the question lingered softly in the air. Could love, born in hiding, truly survive the world beyond these woods? Every story like Rosa's reminds us that courage often begins in silence, in the quiet decision to walk away from what breaks you and toward what heals you. Somewhere out there, someone is still learning that love isn't found in wealth or beauty, but in kindness, patience, and safety. If you've ever felt unseen, know this: your worth isn't measured by the world's approval, but by the strength it took to keep going. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Because the next story, like this one, might just be yours.